There's Sean there. Sean, hold on one second. Good afternoon. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. It is 4 o'clock. We'll give just a few minutes for everybody to log in. Those here from Brantford, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Jiffy Lube, who was our sponsor for the podcast today. Secondly, we got a notice yesterday and another one today on a public hearing on the 16th at 6 o'clock for the mask mandate. I've gotten probably 30 emails today on the mask mandate. I have no inside information on the mask mandate. I don't know what the Board of Ed is going to do. Those I've spoken to said they're open to hearing arguments from both sides. Make it a point to write out your thoughts, send in testimony, or go to that meeting. We'll cover that more leading up to that. I will make sure I'm at that meeting. I rephrase that. I may not be in the area for that meeting, but I'll make sure we cover it. But unfortunately, I do not have an idea of what Hamlin Hernandez wants to do, what the Board of Ed wants to do. I don't know what Guilford wants to do. I know this podcast is watched in Guilford as well. As soon as I get some information, if I do, I'll pass it on to you. But right now, I don't. But I do want to have Sean on. So give me 1 second. Sean, can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Steve.
All right. Good to see you.
Likewise.
And you are in your office at the Capitol.
I am.
All right. First day.
First day.
We'll get to this later on, but this is kind of hoping this is your last first day as a state rep. Am I somewhat correct in that assessment there?
I haven't made that decision yet. So
we have an exploratory committee.
It's a potentially last day. I haven't decided though.
But we already have Maura Rader is her name, the person. So we already have a Democrat who's put their name in the race from Guilford. So that could be an interesting and awkward conversation if you were to choose to continue to run for state rep.
Well, Moira is a friend of mine, and she said publicly that she would step aside if I decide to come back and run again. And, obviously I plan to make a decision here in the next few weeks. If some of your listeners don't know, I filed an exploratory committee for statewide office with a focus on the office of state comptroller. That's a mouthful. A few weeks ago, and I'm sort of getting around the state and talking to folks, and I have to make a decision pretty soon. I love what I'm doing in the legislature, and certainly love what I'm doing at Tweed Airport, which some folks may know I serve as the executive director of. But obviously, I'm interested in the area of work that the comptroller deals with, and obviously, we'll have to make a decision pretty soon here about what I want to do this year.
And we'll talk about that in a little more detail and what that job is, why you may or may not be qualified for it. And then also, clearly you're not planning on being at Tweed. Should you just a full-time job as comptroller. So, we'll talk about that in a second. One thing I did get questions on yesterday, one of the reasons I called you initially was a post you made, which is a fairly innocuous post. It wasn't, all that controversial, but a lot of the comments became controversial on schools and the mask mandate. Town officials. Are you getting a feel for how people feel? Lamont made this decision. I can say, I don't know if it's a decision where he kicked the decision to local school boards or a bold decision to say it's time to move past that. We don't know the reason for that. What is your feeling on the mask in school? One, maybe your personal feeling, and two, the feeling of, or the feel you get from school officials and town officials on removing this mandate.
Yeah. So I guess what I would first of all say is that like so many every other issue we talk about, it's all culture war at this point. And there's people who feel strongly on one side, and they think that the people who disagree with them, hate their way of life, want to be a dictator and a tyrant and impose their will upon them. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. I'm a father. It's an absolute nightmare to keep a mask on my small child. And all of us understand the struggles of that. All of us hate the fact that we see our kids wearing masks, and obviously it's upsetting, but we are doing it because we believe that it's the right thing to do from a public health perspective. And so I do think that it has been the right call to keep that in place throughout the rest of the time that it has been in place. However, we are turning a corner, and I hope that it's the last corner we will ever have to deal with in this virus. And if you read my post, you would know what I said, which is that throughout this pandemic, I have sort of been in the position that people who are scientists and doctors should be listened to by people like me. I am a legislator. I am a political science major. I'm not a science major, right? And so for me to do my job, It requires me to talk to people who know a lot more about every single issue than I do. That's what being a legislator is about, is going out and talking to the people who know what they're doing, whether you have a bill on plumbers, whether you have a bill on heart surgeons, whether you have a bill on COVID, and get informed opinions and then make the best decision you can with the information in front of you. I think what the governor decided to do is probably the right decision, just because the numbers are getting better. And we hope that this is the last wave, just because we finally, I hope, reached a peak of what they refer to as herd immunity, Steve, which I know you're familiar with, where enough people have been vaccinated, enough people have actually gotten COVID, that we've kind of plateaued with the ability for this virus to continue spreading. So what happened now, and why I wrote that post, was because people are a little confused about this. They saw the headline that the governor was getting rid of the mask mandate, but what they didn't really realize was that it's a little bit more complicated than that. And basically, if I can, Steve, just walk folks through real quick what actually is going on. So the governor phrased that yesterday by saying that he was making a recommendation. And people said, why? What is he recommending? He is the governor. Why is he recommending something? And the reason for that is because the law currently says that the DPH, Department of Public Health, and the Education Commissioner are actually empowered to make a suggestion and determination as to whether there should be a statewide mask mandate or not. And so he is recommending to those people who work for him. So obviously, chances are that they'll take his recommendation, and they have subsequently said that they do, that they will take away the mask mandate at the end of this month. Now, what we will do tomorrow in the legislature is have a debate over whether or not we should continue giving them the discretion to reinstitute it for the rest of the school year, if and when, and God willing, not when, things do get bad again with the virus, which we all don't think is going to happen, and all of us pray is not going to happen. But it gives them the ability to do that based on the science and data in front of them. And that is what I think has confused some people, but something that I feel comfortable with, because that's in keeping with the position I've taken from the beginning of COVID, which is that let them give us the recommendations as to what to do. And that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so there is this question of executive orders. And there was a hearing yesterday or the day before where a lot of people who are anti-mask showed up. Can you go through that? What is it at stake with the decision to extend Lamont's executive orders or not?
Well, there's 11 of them. 10 of them are not controversial at all. Okay. And I'm sure we'll get bipartisan support. It's very, non-controversial stuff. What I've heard about for a while is people kept saying the legislature should be making these decisions, not the governor. And I am somebody who, as a student of history, loves this discussion. And I think it's important that you give the executive a lot of power. And I'm somebody who, despite being a legislator, actually believes firmly in executive power. Whether it's the president, whether it's the governor, shouldn't matter whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Ned Lamont or Bob Stefanowski. I just believe that the governor should have the most power, because the governor is full-time and it's his or her job to lead the state. The state legislature is 187 people who work part-time at doing this. And what we found during COVID was not just with Ned, but for every governor, every day they were probably making 50 decisions that had life or death consequences for 1 billion people, right? And it was just impossible to think that the legislature could ever weigh in on that. Well, now what's happened is the legislature is actually in session. And so the order was of his orders were coinciding, the end of them were coinciding with the beginning of our session. And so I do agree that now that we are in session and we can react quickly to things because we're here, we should sort of take the control back from him. But when we go out of session in just 12 weeks from today, we need to give him the flexibility again, if that's something that when we leave here, the virus is at a position we have to do that, but we have time to figure that out. And so basically we are going to take the bull by the horns here for a few months and then evaluate where things are at towards the end of the session. If things are looking as good as they are now, and we're heading in the summer where the cases usually decline precipitously, I don't know that we'll extend it, but that remains to be seen.
Okay. Actually, so I'm going to follow up and talk about your student history of a student of history question here. Your issue is you want to give more power to the executive branch because you guys are part-time right now, and that kind of makes sense. Ed Meyer proposed in the past of a smaller legislature but a full-time legislature. Would you feel the same way if that was in place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't,
Oh,
because I think that the full-time legislature enables whoever those people would be to be a partner in government and a co-equal branch in government. Right now, we're not. It's not
yeah.
possible to do that in an emergency. I still, even with a full-time legislature, would again err towards the side of giving the executive the power. But I do think we could play a bigger role than we can now, just because even something so simple as scheduling a special session day when we're not in session, like in
Mhm.
September when we had to do this, it took weeks of planning to
Yeah.
do that, to just find a quorum, because people have business trips, they have vacations, they have lives, they have deaths in the family. It's very hard to get 187 people together on short notice to react to things quickly. And love him or hate him, I think the governor has done a very good job of judiciously using those powers during the first 2 years of this situation. And that's why I voted a couple of times to re-up his powers. If the tables were turned and I was getting a lot of feedback from constituents that said, hey, he is abusing these things, then I would have had second thoughts about that. But I think he did judiciously use them.
Okay. I think most people I've talked to agree. But most people I talk to also want to see the mask mandate end. Okay, let's go back to the start of the session, first of all. Right now, you are a state rep. What are you, and you actually have a fairly significant position as state rep on the
Yeah.
finance board. What are your agendas going into this session?
Well, my biggest agenda is trying to cut taxes, which I know sounds strange for people to hear a Democrat say, but it's been something I've consistently said for a long time. And one of the things I think my party does really wrong is that when we talk about taxes, we're usually talking about the taxes we want to raise on people, predominantly people who are more affluent. I think that's a mistake. And I think that we should be the party of cutting taxes for working middle class people, like the families that I grew up in. Because when I became chair of this committee last year, I tried to focus on tax cutting and proposed a number of different tax decreases as my tenure as the chair got underway. And that's going to be even more important to me now because we have a $2 billion budget surplus in this current fiscal year. We have a $3 billion rainy day fund. So that's $5 billion. Not all of that money can be used, nor should it be used, because I think,
Mhm.
one of the reasons we were in a bad way for 10 years or so was because we made some really irresponsible decisions and spent money that we shouldn't have spent. But I do think when you think about things like the child tax credit proposal that I've put forward, it's a 40% income tax cut to most parents, if not all parents in the state. It's the largest tax cut they've ever had in the history of Connecticut. That cost $300 million. So in a $2 billion deficit situation or surplus situation, it's not that much money. The property tax credit, the car tax proposal that the governor put forward today, all of those things are only about $150-200 million, but yet they would mean significant savings to people in Brantford and Guilford and across the state. And so I'm going to spend most of my time in this session trying to come up with a tax package that's bipartisan, that both parties can get behind, where we cut taxes for the kind of folks that we all say we want to help. And that's going to take up pretty much all my time, I'm guessing.
No, you've been consistent with a lot of those things, and the car tax is a new one from him. But we've seen that proposed in various forms 5 or 6 different times. It's always seemed to make sense that somebody with a Mercedes in Brantford pays a different number than Greenwich and New Haven.
Yeah.
But it looks like there's some more support for it now than there's been in the past. Now, talk about, of all the positions you can run for, comptroller. Now, my first question is, why is Sean Scanlon, who I've supported before and endorsed before, qualified for comptroller? So start, first of all, with telling us. Now, I don't think the general public understands what comptroller does,
No idea.
or how you say it, comptroller, whatever you want to say, does it to begin with. It's just another box on the election form on the ballot every year. What does
Yeah.
it do? Tell me first what it does, then we'll get to your qualifications.
Yeah, I mean, most people have zero idea what it does, but
Mhm.
what it does is really relevant to most people. And part of the reason why I'm interested in it is to see if I can use it to actually do more than I can do as a state rep to help people in the things that I care about. And the two biggest things that I care about, Steve, as you know, because I've talked about it on this show and with you over the years, is healthcare and the budget. For 4 years, I was the chair of the insurance committee, and now I'm the chair of the finance committee. So the comptroller basically has 6 different divisions that are in that office. They range from everything from accounts payable, meaning that they pay every one of the state's bills, to managing the IT, to doing the retirement function. So when a state trooper retires after 25 years, they come to your office and they do their paperwork and they get their pension. That's really administrative stuff. There's 250 employees that work at the office that do all that kind of bureaucratic stuff. But the two things that the comptroller sort of most visibly does are the things that interest me the most, which is, number one, he or she is really the chief healthcare officer of the state, in the sense that they are negotiating and purchasing healthcare for 300,000 people, which are both the current state employees, their family members, retirees, and then there's about 56,000 people who work for towns that pool in with the state employee plan in this thing called a partnership program to leverage the massive buying power of the state. So 300,000 people is 10% of the entire healthcare economy of the state. And when I was chair of the insurance committee, I got to know both the players in the industry, meaning the CEOs of the insurance companies, the CEOs of the hospital in the state. And those are the people that you are directly negotiating with to get the best rate possible for the employees. Now, that's good for you because you want to help your employees, but that's good for the taxpayers, because any money that you save on the state employee health plan is money that the taxpayers aren't spending to give healthcare to the state employees. And so I think it's a really interesting position. Secondly to that is that, we can test things out amongst those 300,000 people and see what works. And then if it does work, extrapolate it to all of the public, right? A good example of that, we have this thing, if you're a state employee, it's called the HEP program, Health Enhancement Program. And every year, it's kind of annoying. You get a postcard and it says, this is the year that you got to go get a blood test and your wife's got to go get a mammogram. And if you don't comply with those things and do the preventative wellness checks, then you actually can lose your insurance after a couple penalties of you doing it. What we've found, Steve, in doing that program is that people are catching things earlier, and we're saving money healthcare spend wise because people are finding conditions before they become bad, and that you can actually manage them and save money on it. So imagine taking a program like that and extrapolating to the entire population. We can't mandate that because they're not all our state employees, but you could use that as an incentivized program to say, hey, maybe your premium can be less if you enter into a HEP-like program for Aetna or for Anthem or for Connecticut, and find ways to incentivize that kind of wellness versus just spending on healthcare. So that's one. But the second thing is, you're the chief fiscal watchdog of the state, and you're making recommendations to the legislature and to the governor on how you can be better when it comes to the budget. Kevin Lembo is the guy who had this job for 10 years. He's a friend of mine. He resigned in December because of a health problem. And the thing that Kevin is most known for is, in 2017, he suggested this thing called the volatility cap. Now, this is like eyes glazing over stuff for most people, but that volatility cap is really, really important. It basically says this: Connecticut has a really big problem in that we have a very volatile income tax collection. And that's because we are so dependent on what happens on Wall Street, because there's about 150 men and women in Fairfield County that make a ton of money every year on Wall Street. And when things are going really well, we do very well as a budget. When things are not going well, we don't do so well as a budget. And one of the reasons why we had these boom and bust budget cycles for about 10 years in the 2010s was because that volatility was crazy, and it was very hard to predict what we could actually budget. And more often than not, we were wrong. And when we were wrong, we had structural deficits because our projections were all wrong. And so we had this really big budget impasse in 2017, and we couldn't agree on anything. And Kevin basically came in and said, look, guys, what if we do this? When the market is doing really well, let's take some of that money, and you can't spend it, and you can't use it to cut taxes. We're just going to stock it away, right, under the mattress, so that when things are not going well, that money is there. Well, guess what's happened? In 5 years since he recommended that and the legislature adopted it, we now have a $2 billion surplus, and we have a $3 billion rainy day fund for the first time ever in the history of Connecticut. And things are so good in Connecticut, Steve, because of this and that volatility cap, that not only do we have a rainy day fund that's at 3.5, it's actually full at the legal capacity that can be at, which is 15% of the budget, which means that any money on top of that that comes in on the volatility cap, we actually put to paying down pension debt. And for the first time ever in Connecticut history last November, we actually were able to make a $1.3 billion overage payment towards the pension debt. It took off 3% of our unfunded liability. That doesn't sound like a lot to average people, but because we're projected to do it again next year and again the year after that, that's 9%, almost 10% knocked off our pension debt in just 3 years, which is insane because we didn't even pay down our pension debt for 25 years. And so what attracts me to this is not that it's the sexiest office in the world. What attracts me to it is that there are limitations as to what you can accomplish as a state rep in terms of the megaphone of the state. And while people may not know who the comptroller is, they may know the name of the comptroller because they see him or her on the news. And that person is a statewide elected official who people do pay attention to on things like this, which is why Kevin was able to do that. And so what I'm doing this exploratory committee for is a genuine exploratory committee to decide whether or not I think I can make a bigger difference doing that job than I can as just one state rep. Although I am in a position of power as a state rep, as the finance chair, there are limits to what I can do. The governor has a really big platform. I care about some tax, cuts, but he got up there today and said his stuff, and that will lead the news. The press conference that I had about the tax cuts that I want is not going to lead the nightly news. And it may not as the comptroller either, but you do have a bigger platform and you are more known to more people. And I think if that means that you can influence the debate more about tax policy, healthcare policy, the state in general, I think that that's an interesting thing to consider doing.
Yeah, but Sean, if I play devil's advocate for a second,
yeah,
much of those responsibilities a town has and a finance director who negotiates those things, pays the bills, things of that nature. Most states who have comptrollers or finance directors, for lack of a better word, they're not elected. One of the few states where they are elected, and they're probably not elected for a reason. These are about qualifications. You said your degree is in political science. Your thing is government. You're going from policy to, implementation or more advocacy. Is that really the job of that seat? And why would your background be better than someone who has a significant finance background for that seat?
Well, because I think like a lot of jobs, it's about whether you're a good manager or not. And like I said, there's 250 employees that work there, from economists to CPAs to people who are really, really good at numbers and know the state budget better than I do. What you need is somebody who understands how to get things done. And I do know how to get things done in politics and in government. And I do have a good understanding of what that job entails and what it means to be effective there. Kevin Lembo was the comptroller. He was the healthcare advocate for the state.
Yes.
Before that, Nancy Wyman was the comptroller for 16 years, and she was an X-ray technician, right? So, there are not clear-cut qualifications to get in the door. But I will tell you, Steve, that I don't know that I would have been as good potentially at that job as I would have been if I hadn't spent the last 2.5 years at Tweed. And the reason for that is because I took that job wanting to learn the private sector and wanting to be a manager of something and to learn business, because I had never done that before. I had been a staffer to a politician, and I had been a politician myself. In the last 2.5 years, I've worked closely with Goldman Sachs to learn business, right? We put together $100 million infrastructure deal. We've hired 100 people in the last 2 months. Next week, or actually on Friday, we're going to be announcing we're hiring 100 more people in the next 2 months. So to have worked to create 200 jobs in the last 6 months, to put together this deal, to run an airport, I think that I've gained a lot of skills that would make me a capable administrator of this agency and to be an effective person in that job. But again, at the end of the day, like everything with elected office, I put myself out there before the voters. And if they feel like what I have to say is something that they believe and that they believe in me and think I could do the job, then I probably will win. If they don't, then I will probably lose. And that's the That's the beauty of our democracy. And I feel like it's something I should be exploring at this time in my life.
So let's talk about Tweed.
Yeah.
The reaction so far from everybody, save a few people that I see on social media, has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yep.
They love being on their plane in 20 minutes, and they're in Florida. Where do we stand with that, and what's the next step with expansion? What approvals are needed? What is the likelihood of approval? Give us a rundown.
Yeah. So, next week we will have another big announcement about 4 more destinations from New Haven. They are not in the state of Florida. I can tell you
all
that.
right. Okay.
So we're
You have
going to
Chicago, We're not Vegas yet, right? But
we're going to 2 other states. So we will, by the end of
okay.
this month, we'll be in 3 different states. Still warmer weather destinations because that's kind of where people want to go.
No
But I
Chicago.
think by early March, you will see some diversification of those, and there'll even be more routes that are added. And the reason we're talking about that is because the service has been tremendously well received, to your point. So our flights are in the 85% load factor. The industry standard is 75%, meaning that they're 75% full. We're in the 80s, high 80s, in some cases in the 90s, depending on the different routes. Palm Beach, for example, is off the charts in the 90s. The planes are almost full every single day, which is awesome. So that's obviously the short term. The long term is that $100 million deal that I was talking about. And that's how we can build a new runway and build a new terminal to accommodate even more service in that airport than we can do now. So it's great that Avelo is going to be launching some new flights and adding more capacity, but we're like pretty much getting to capacity at that airport and certainly in our parking and other things like that. So we do need to expand. The first step of that process is to do this thing called an environmental assessment, and that assessment is underway right now. We hope to finish it up by the summer, and then once that assessment is done, we have to basically go to DEEP, the state agency that does the environmental protection stuff, and the FAA, who's our federal regulator, and basically present our case and get permits from the state. And if we do get those permits, we can move forward with this project. And we feel very confident about the fact that we will get those permits. We have had DEEP and the FAA at the table throughout this process of the EA. We talk to them almost weekly and keep them up to date, and they ask questions and we give answers. And we feel like it's going in the right direction. But obviously we have some more work to do. And if everything goes according to plan, we will be able to lengthen the runway by 1,000 feet at some point in the early part of next year, and then build a new terminal by 2025.
And from a local municipality standpoint, are there votes needed from New Haven, from East Haven? Because that's the only objections I'm hearing are a few residents in East Haven. Even East Haven residents in general seem to be for it, but we are hearing a few that are against it. Is there a vote municipally that has to happen in East Haven or New Haven?
Definitely not in New Haven. We had the vote we needed in New Haven, which was the Board of Alders gave us unanimously, I will add, a 43-year lease extension back in September of last year. And I'm not sure that there has to be a vote in East Haven yet. We're still sort of doing the due diligence on that and figuring out what needs to be done. So too early to say, but I'm confident that the project is going to move forward. We have an incredible amount of support, even in places like East Haven. Our polling suggests that it's overwhelmingly popular. And by overwhelmingly, I mean really, really popular. The people of East Haven are among, the top 5 purchasers of tickets for Avelo based on zip code data that we have obviously taken a look at. And I think it's important for people to know that, yes, while there are people that raise concerns, and I try very hard to address those concerns, I think that by and large, overwhelmingly, most people think this is a good thing for the region. And I think as you see us expand the airport even more than it already has been in the next few weeks and announce new flights to different kinds of places, people will start to see the grand plan coming together, which is that we said from day one, if you build it, they will come. The market is there. People are there. And I think the fact that, as we will announce on Friday, that 70,000 people have either arrived or departed out of that airport since just November, it's clear the demand is there.
So, I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm in that area on a fairly regular basis. I have not seen any noticeable traffic jams or anything significant with 70,000. It's an interesting thing to look at because when we talk about even bringing things like a Costco or an Amazon to Brantford, everybody talks about these high traffic numbers. I haven't seen a massive difference in East Haven based on 70,000 cars. So that's good to see. Now, I will say you took some criticism in the state when you were first given that job. And I won't say where the criticism came from, but I supported you in that job. I'm glad you had that job. I'm glad that job is going the way it has. Is all the plans in place? If you leave come next January to become Comptroller or Comptroller, are the plans in place and they will continue without you?
Yeah.
Okay.
This year is the pivotal year, right? So once we get that environmental assessment back, which I hope again is in the middle of this year, that gives us about 6 months to get all the proper permits and get everything lined up. And then at that point, the construction would start on the big project. And, at that point, again, I have to make a decision, but at that point, perhaps it's time for somebody else to come in and oversee that next phase of the project. When I took that job, just about everybody told me I was going to throw my career away. And I didn't have any airport experience. And obviously I had never done this before. But what I got hired for is because I think I'm pretty good at talking to people. And I think pretty good at finding common ground and working together with people and collaborative. And it's what I did in the legislature. And at the end of the day, Steve, as you know, because you wrote about this, they didn't have an aviation problem at Tweed. They had a political problem at Tweed.
Yeah.
And so I have been able and very fortunate to have been able to work hard to try to bring people together and get done what most people thought would never happen. And I will always be deeply proud of that. But sometimes in life, you get something done, and I did what I set out to accomplish, which was to get the deal together. And perhaps it's best left in the hands of somebody who perhaps has a lot of construction background, or somebody who, maybe does something different than I do. And that's the conversation that I have to have in my head and with the partners that I'm working on in this deal. And we'll have to make a decision at the end of the day.
Okay. All right. Well, Sean, I appreciate it. We'll have you on probably later on in the session, and any questions that come up, we'll certainly come to you. Good luck with the taxes. I'd like to see all our car taxes drop. That'd be nice. And the child tax credit continued. But good work on Tweed. I'm looking forward to what next week we're going to find out the towns.
Yeah, so there'll be another announcement next Wednesday, I think, of the next 4 routes we'll be going to, and it's exciting stuff. So please stay tuned.
Sean, I appreciate it. Good luck in the session.
Steve. Good to see you.
I'll talk to you. Okay, so I always enjoy having Sean on. He knows his stuff. Some elected officials you talk to, you ask a question, and they're kind of dancing around. Sean knows he's a politician. He knows how to give political answers. There's no question. But he's knowledgeable and knows his stuff. And even if you disagree with some things, he knows the answers and can inform us on a lot. The job he's done on Tweed is exceptional. When he first got that job, there were a lot of people, journalists who wrote op-eds against it. It was just crazy that he got this job. It's just because of who he knew. Matt Hoey, who is the first selectman in Guilford, was on the board who selected him. They thought it was friendship, what have you. And I wrote at the time, you can go back and look a few years back when I wrote this, it was a political issue. This is someone who had worked for Chris Murphy, who on speed dial would have access to national congressmen, national House members, Rosa DeLauro, Murphy, Blumenthal. With those people, if he needed help to get to Goldman Sachs or get to an airline or get to a high executive, he could do that because of those connections. Those were the most important things he bought. And yes, he is a diplomat, and there's no question about that. So he's done a great job there. And I will tell you 99% of the feedback. I'm very close friends with someone who literally lives next to Robinson Aviation, which is next to the airport. They don't hear it. On occasion, you may hear a plane, but you get used to it. It's not a big deal. There's not an extensive amount of traffic there. It's not the end of the world. There are some people, for political reasons, what have you, in East Haven, that are yelling, but it's a small group. In general, the overwhelming response has been positive. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the other 4 locations are. I'm not a massive Florida person, so hopefully it's something like Charlotte's in there, or Myrtle Beach kind of thing. That'd be amazing. Atlanta, maybe. We'll see. We'll know that next week. But 70,000 people have gone through Tweed from November to February 9th. That is impressive and a really good job by Sean. Now, I think it's a legitimate question. Is he someone who's qualified for a job like Comptroller, which is a finance job, essentially? It handles a large staff, 250 people, he said. I don't know that he has experience managing 250 people. He has to make that case. I certainly think he can make the case that he can negotiate with large companies, as he's doing with Goldman Sachs. He can certainly make the case that he knows healthcare, that he knows policy, and certainly one of the advantages he had with Tweed was an advantage he'll have as Comptroller is he's well connected. He spent years working for Chris Murphy. He spent years as a state representative. He is a co-chair of the Finance Commission of the committee in Hartford, which is a powerful position. He's connected to powerful people. And so when it comes to getting things done, he might be a really good guy in that seat. Don't know who the opposition is yet. We have to analyze that. I'd like to see that healthcare plan in some way, shape, or form open to others, growing that negotiating power. We'll see if he can do that if he's successful in running for that seat. And usually, very rarely, does someone open an exploratory committee and then not run for the seat. So I'm expecting him to run. I'm expecting Moira Rader from Guilford to run as a Democrat for that seat as well. We don't know if there's a Republican name for that seat yet. That said, thank you, Sean, for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We'll be back on tomorrow. I have no guests scheduled, so it's just me. So if you want to tune in and hear me ramble about anything or have questions or comments, get back to me. I'll answer those tomorrow. Until then, I hope you all